Many would say that AAA games aren't exactly in the best place right now, from massive, unnecessary Hollywood-like budgets to a lack of innovation, and of course free-to-play models and nasty monetization practices. More and more video game fans are starting to turn to the indie scene every day. Indies now feel like the preservation of our past and the hope for our future. But speaking of the past, there's no denying history in that many of today's publishers were responsible for some of the greatest games ever created. But far too often, they've abandoned some of the best series in gaming. And today we're here to call out 5 examples where indie developers picked up the slack and outclassed AAA publishers. As always, we thank you so much for supporting independent content here at I Dream of Indie Games. If you like videos like these and you love indies, well, consider hitting the subscribe button, liking the video, and better yet, head on over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames where you can gain Discord access to the greatest indie gaming community out there, early ad-free shows, shoutouts at the end of every single video we produce, and yes, even free games depending on the tier, along with a new podcast exclusively for you. Your new indie gaming community is waiting for you. Let's head back to 1995 first, one of the great JRPGs ever released and considered one of the best Super Nintendo games of all time, hell, one of the best games of all time. We're of course talking about Chrono Trigger, which had an all-star lineup including Sakaguchi, of course, of Final Fantasy fame. You had the artwork of Akira Toriyama, rest in peace, very sad news recently. It was really a dream team and a fantastic game. I'm not going to go into the history of Chrono Trigger here because you probably know it at this point, or you at least know of this game, but the bottom line is, it feels like Square Enix pretty much gave up on the Chrono series far too soon. In 1996, fans in Japan got Radical Dreamers, which kind of tied up some of the loose ends of Chrono Trigger, and then we all got, in 1999, Chrono Cross, which is an excellent sequel, though maybe not quite as good as the original, still a great game that sold a lot of copies as far as I know. But apparently 1.5 million, which is the number I found, wasn't enough to keep this franchise afloat. Hard to believe, huh? You sell 1.5 million copies of a game and you can't get a sequel? And this was back in the late 90s. There's been whispers here or there, fans tried to make Chrono Trigger again, all that kind of stuff. Recently, I believe Square Enix actually polled audiences if they would like to see more Chrono Trigger. Of course, they're gonna say yes to that. But ultimately, we don't have anything right now. So, indies have to step in and kind of fill that void. And boy did they ever. Sea of Stars from Sabotage Studio is very clearly inspired by Chrono Trigger and other JRPGs too, but boy, you really feel the Chrono Trigger influence in this one. Hell, it even has some tracks from the Chrono series composer Yasunori Mitsuda. The awesome turn-based combat, the pixelated graphics, the gorgeous soundtrack. This is the Chrono Trigger that fans have really been waiting for, and Square Enix completely missed the boat, as Sabotage just announced 5 million copies of this bad boy sold. Ouch. I bet they are burning up over there at Square Enix. Or maybe they don't give a shit. They should give a shit though, because wow, those are some serious numbers for a game that probably cost a fraction of what Square Enix is used to spending. And yes, Square Enix did try stuff like the Octopath Traveler series with some success, but let me tell you, that ain't Chrono, and Sea of Stars is much closer to the Chrono series than Octopath Traveler is. Sabotage Studio is so talented, I can't wait to see what they come up with next. My money is on a Sea of Stars sequel. That just makes sense when you sell 5 million copies in the indie space. Congrats to them, and Square Enix, you probably missed the boat on bringing Chrono back at all now. I mean, how do you bring Chrono Trigger back without the original artist? Now it's just in this weird area, so I don't really see a remake. I don't really think they should do that. Maybe you relaunch the series entirely, whole new story, but it's in the Chrono universe, kind of like Chrono Cross was, which hey, was a pretty dang good game too. Or you know, more likely they release some dogshit AAA game that nobody gives a shit about. Next we move on to a franchise that hasn't really been all that exceptional. Gosh, you kinda gotta go back to the early 90s. We're talking about the Contra series, and boy have there been a lot of clunkers from Konami since the good ones back in the early 90s. The last Contra game I really truly remember loving was 1994's Contra Hard Corps on the Genesis. Since then, we've had a weird mix of Contra games on PlayStation, like Contra Shattered Soldier or Neo Contra. Contra 4 on the DS was a halfway decent game, but it's been tough sledding overall for this franchise, and it hasn't really found its footing. It even got into the mobile space for a bit, and those games were particularly bad. This leads up to the most recent release, just a few days back really at the time of this video, Contra Operation Galuga. I've only played the demo for this one so far. It felt pretty mediocre to me personally, it looked pretty old and mediocre to me, and it looks like reviews out there are kind of in that same boat. It feels a little more like classic Contra, but also not exceptional in any real way, and certainly outclassed. One of the games that outclassed this franchise is Blazing Chrome, which is very clearly inspired by the Contra series. You really just have to take one look at it to understand that. Blazing Chrome comes to us from developer Joy Masher and publisher The Arcade Crew, and you won't believe that you're not playing a modern Contra game. Yes, it has the old classic look, but it feels fun and fresh and exciting, just like a new Contra should. Awesome, hard-hitting soundtrack, cool characters, intense action, and you know, no roguelike nonsense. It's just a straight 5-level shoot-through. Is shoot-through a thing? Well, I'm making it a thing. But seriously, when people were asking me recently, should I grab the new Contra? It's kinda sorta like a halfway decent Contra. I said, I would look at Blazing Chrome if I were you. It feels like a much better game. In fact, I'm 99% sure it is a better game. Joy Masher sure made Konami look foolish with this excellent release. Not to pile it on Konami, but next we are talking about the Ninja Turtles. Hey, credit where it's due, Konami actually published some of the great Ninja Turtles games, but they were also responsible for some of the to not so great Ninja Turtles games, like the 2003 reboot for the series, which actually had an art style that I really liked. These games were okay, they did make 3 of them, but it seemed like they got progressively worse. In 2007, things got particularly ugly when TMNT Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles launched. This time it came from the good folks over at Ubisoft. And you guessed it, no bueno. With good Konami out of the picture, this franchise just got stinkier and stinkier, kind of like rotting pizza with anchovies on it. You had stinkers like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Smash Up, Reshelled, which was a remake of sorts of Turtles in Time, a total dud. Out of the Shadows, the list goes on, and Ninja Turtles stayed bad pretty much all the way up until 2022 with the release of the outstanding beat-em-up Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. That's right, Tribute Games, Emu, and Gamera Games to the rescue, and boy did they really rescue this franchise, making one of my favorite beat-em-up games of all time. Gee, what a no-brainer, just make a fun beat-em-up game in a retro style and it will do well. And Shredder's Revenge did just that, selling millions of copies. The game feels awesome, it has modern touches like cross-play, up to 6 players can play at once, an amazing soundtrack, all of the characters are here that you would want to see, and I can't wait for a sequel. Please do a sequel. Boy, did it feel great to see the Turtles in an awesome game again. Give us more, please. All right, next we're gonna pick on Capcom a little bit, who created one of the great franchises of all time, of course, Mega Man. And the Mega Man X series in particular always resonated with me. You know, it was 1993 or so when Mega Man X came out. I was kind of coming into my teenage years. I was around 12 or so, and it was cool and mature. He had this awesome armor, and it was a great game. It felt like Mega Man, but for teens instead of kids. Not that all ages can't enjoy the Mega Man series, but you get what I mean. And the X series continued to be pretty great, even though they got kind of hard to find after X2. I recall not being able to find Mega Man X3 in many stores, because it was late SNES probably. But either way, the original trilogy is fantastic, with 1 and 2 being my favorites. And X4, actually, when it moved over to PlayStation and Sega Saturn, was a good game. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Things started to go downhill a bit though from 5 on. 5 was okay, 6 was worse, 7 was even worse, and then 8 kind of tried to get things back on track, but also wasn't exceptional, and ultimately Mega Man X was done for good as of 2004. There were a few spin-offs here or there, but that was about it for the series. Dead, kaput. I honestly can't believe Capcom hasn't brought Mega Man X back. One of the biggest bonehead decisions that I can imagine. Is it just not enough money for you? Come on, there's gotta be money to be made out of Mega Man X. It's so classic. So many fans love this series still, and they love Mega Man. I guess the numbers don't bear out though. So instead, Capcom beats us over the head with Resident Evil after Resident Evil, which is perfectly fine, but boy do I sure miss Mega Man X. Thankfully, I'm in the indie scene about 99% of the time, and Berserk Boy, a recent release, really scratched that Mega Man X itch for me with a little bit of a touch of Gunvolt in there too. It's not just Berserk Boy though, in fact a lot of indies have made Capcom look foolish. You could in fact argue that Shovel Knight doesn't exist without the original Mega Man games. Cuphead doesn't exist without Mega Man. And other awesome indie games like Bat Boy. There's a ton of Mega Man style games. I just called out Berserk Boy first because it really did give me that X vibe more than a lot of the more recent indie games out there. And selfishly, I wanted to shout that game out again because it is one of my favorite releases this year. You should definitely go over to the Steam page or wherever you buy video games and support Berserk Boy because it is awesome. But yeah, will we ever see Mega Man X again? I have my doubts. We've come to our final selection, and where does one begin with the Mother, or maybe you know it as Earthbound series? Oh boy, what a history here. Earthbound is a Super Nintendo game that I just loved as a kid. It did not sell well, which is pretty obvious. It never really caught on here in North America when it released, but boy did it sure catch fire the years that followed. That's a shame when that happens to games and they become cult classic, because cult classic means that the game didn't initially sell well. But that doesn't mean that it's game over necessarily. We've seen things like The Nightmare Before Christmas linger on and produce more profit well after its initial run. Not enough for Nintendo though, who keeps slamming the door on Mother 3, time and time again really. Actually, it's hard to believe they're not just trolling y'all out there at this point. They have teased Mother 3 so many times that it just has to be painful for North American players. Yes, there is a fan translation, there's ways to play it, yada yada yada. I'm not going to recommend those here. There's no legal way, really non-gray area way, to play Mother 3 to this damn day, which is an absolute travesty. And you would think someone over at Nintendo would wake up and see what the very talented Toby Fox did with Undertale, which took the indie gaming world by storm back in 2015 and has become somewhat of a phenomenon ever since it released. Undertale is so loved. If you go to any gaming convention, you'll see records of it, you'll see merchandise, you'll see t-shirts, all kinds of crazy stuff. This quirky RPG is so clearly inspired by Earthbound, or Mother, whatever you call it, that it's insane that Nintendo didn't capitalize and make something like this out of that franchise. I mean, wake up, clearly there was a lot of money to be made in that space, and Nintendo didn't even have to break the bank. They could have just had an old school 16-bit visual style once again, and things would have been just fine. Folks would have ate the game up. It would have sold hundreds of thousands of copies, I'm sure. Enough to make some money. Or better yet, don't make a new game at all, and just release Mother 3 and make a quick, easy buck. Can't be bothered. But hey, thank you so much for bothering with this list. This was actually really fun to make. I enjoyed creating this and coming up with all of the different games. This was a blast. Thank you so much for supporting independent content again here at I Dream of Indie Games. We'd love to do more videos like this that are more evergreen, I would say. They last forever. You can watch them anytime. We know you love your reviews here, but it's really cool to produce other types of content too. Thank you so much for supporting indies. As always, voice to the voiceless. I will see you on the channel for more indie gaming goodness.